Should the Rockets look to trade Christian Wood this deadline while his value is high, or should he be a long-term plan for this Rockets team and their future? We're going to talk about that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select Jalen Green.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep getting better every day. I'm going to keep perfecting my craft. And every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. Now, today's episode is brought to you by TrueBill. TrueBill is a new app that helps you save money by identifying and stopping the subscriptions that you don't need or want, and can even negotiate better deals on the ones that you want to keep. Go check out our friends over at TrueBill. Today's episode, I want to get into the debate on Christian Wood, because it seems like this kind of, jumps up, every so often, and by every so often, I mean like every other day or so, within the Rockets Twitter sphere, the Rockets fandom, whether or not Christian Wood should be on this team as a long-term fit, or if the Rockets should look to trade him at their earliest, at the earliest possible point to, receive a decent return for him, that kind of thing. So I want to dive into some of the specifics on that debate, talking both sides of it, right? The pros for trading Christian Wood, the cons against trading Christian Wood, or I guess just the pros on both sides, not necessarily pros and cons. Anyways, I want to get into that, but I also want to briefly hit on a couple points here in the first segment. One about Kevin Porter Jr. and his passing, and then one on Alperen Sengun and his minutes, another internal debate amongst Rockets fans that we need to just hurry up and dead, because it's getting pretty tiresome. So I want to start with KPJ. And with KPJ, I was looking over and kind of rewatching some of his, plays from the Rockets-Lakers game, and because I was compiling, a list or a video package, a highlight reel of his 9 assists from that game. And he had some pretty amazing dimes in that game. He was really doing a great job finding, facilitating for his teammates. But I had 2 observations as I was doing that. So first of which is that not only did KPJ have the 9 assists, he also had plenty of passes in that game that were like the passes that led to something positive happening, right? Whether it was like a pass to Christian Wood rolling to the rim and he gets fouled, so he's getting 2 free throws. So KPJ doesn't get credited for that, but it was the right pass, the right read, and it was a great play by him. He also had a handful of passes that were like the hockey assist pass, right? So the pass to the pass that was then to the, to secure the bucket. So I just want to, again, give a quick shout to KPJ, because his growth as a playmaker, since the Rockets have opened up the court and allowed him the space to really operate, it's been arguably night and day, right? I had my doubts about KPJ as the point guard of the future for this team. I still don't know if he's necessarily, like, again, a traditional point guard in that, mentality, whatever, floor general, whatever labels you want to throw on it. But I knew that he had, the ability to pass, that his court vision was there, that the playmaking ability was there. It was just whether or not he was going to be able to tap into it consistently enough, and then also really control the flow of the game, right? And get guys in the right spots, feeding them at the right times, making the right decisions consistently over the course of a 48-minute ball game, not just, okay, he had some flashes, for a brief stint here, but then he looks like he's struggling or lost or, over dribbling, bad decisions, ill-advised shots for other stretches of the game. And it really does look like his ability to run the team has taken that step to where it needs to be, right? He's taken that next step as the primary facilitator, as the ball handler for this Rockets team. And it's great to see. I want to see it continue. I don't want to see him be really good for like 2 or 3 games and then have a couple games where he struggles. But since the Rockets have committed to Christian Wood at the 5, and since they've, opened up the floor and basically moved Daniel Tice to, catching a whole bunch of DNPs, things have looked significantly better for this Rockets team. KPJ looks more comfortable out there being able to orchestrate things. And I think that honestly, we basically have to take like the first 15, 17 games of the season or whatever, basically the 15-game losing streak, and just chuck that data set, that data set out the window, because the double big lineup did so much harm to everybody, right? It hurt Daniel Tice, it hurt Christian Wood, it hurt KPJ, it hurt Jalen Green. It was a terrible experiment. And regardless of whose fault that experiment is, whether it was Steven Silas not realizing it wasn't working, whether it was an edict from upper management, whether it was Christian Wood wanting to play the 4 and not playing the 5, there's a million different reasons that we can throw out for that situation not working. I'm glad that the Rockets are past it, and I'm glad that we're seeing consistent growth and development now from the guys that we've wanted to see, right? KPJ's growth as the point guard is a sticking point for this season. It's why John Wall had to sit out. It's why the Rockets wanted John Wall to sit out. So being able to see that growth and development from him, and him being comfortable as the facilitator for this team, great to see. I just wanted to touch on that point because, again, I don't think I spent enough time praising KPJ in the last episode for how good he looked against the Lakers. So with that, there's another point that I want to hit very quickly here in the top of this segment before we get into the Christian Wood stuff, because that's going to take up the rest of the show. Can we stop the debate about Alperen Sengun's minutes? It is exhausting at this point, because it feels like every single game, all we're doing is, oh, Alp didn't get enough minutes, or, oh, Alp should have played. I love Alperen Sengun. I think he is uber talented. I think he's got a bright future in the NBA. It's okay to want him to play more minutes. That's not I'm not sitting here trying to dump on that. It's okay to want to see him play more, but it seems like all of the debates on Rockets Twitter, online, just everywhere across social media, it's all about, okay, how many minutes did Alp play, right? And that's the number one sticking point for Rockets Twitter, all of the discussions, all of that. And it's tiresome. It's exhausting. It's not fun, right? Because, yeah, we can sit here and say, oh, he only got 15 minutes. He should have gotten 20, 25, whatever, debating, oh, is it foul trouble? Is there some conspiracy theory against? No, there's no conspiracy theory against Alperen Sengun, right? Whatever reasons the coaching staff have for playing him the amount of minutes that they're playing him. I got into a Rockets Twitter space late Monday night and voiced a couple reasons for why, his minutes aren't where they're, he's not getting more minutes than he is right now. Part of it's the rotation pattern that the Rockets are electing to use with him. Until the Rockets are willing to commit more minutes to Alperen Sengun and Christian Wood on the floor at the same time, it's really tough for Alp to break 20 minutes a night, because right now he basically gets 2 blocks of playing time, right? He checks in near the tail end of the first quarter and plays a straight stretch of minutes until Christian Wood is ready to check back in. Or if there is a little bit of overlap, then sure. But largely the overlap has been at the start of their minutes together, Christian Wood and Alperen Sengun. And then Wood checks back in at some point in the second quarter. And that's Alp gets that 1 block of time, right, to play. So if you want Alp to play north of 20 minutes, it's basically impossible right now with this current substitution pattern, because Silas would have to play Alp for 11, 12, 13 minutes in a row to be able to get him north of 20 minutes with this current pattern, right? So that's an observation that I had. And if the Rockets are wanting to see Alp and Christian Wood play more together, that's all they have to do, is they have to change up the substitution pattern. But right now, that's why he's not getting north of 20 minutes on a nightly basis, because he checks in at one point, plays a solid, stretch of minutes, and then checks out, right? Even against the Lakers, Alp was playing some really solid basketball in his second half stint against the Lakers. And some Rockets fans were upset that Christian Wood checked back in for him to close out the game over the final, 4 or 5 minutes or so. Alp had played a straight 10, 11 minutes. And even Steven Silas mentioned it, in post game that he had played, a solid 10 or 11 minutes in a row. And so that is a consideration that the coaching staff has to think about is, these players get tired. You can't just run them, 13, 14, 15 straight minutes. You can, but they're going to be exhausted by the end of it, right? So unless they're willing to, shake up his substitution pattern and how that looks, it's going to be really hard for him to break, north of 20 something minutes on any given night. So I just wanted to bring that out and just beg that we can move away from that discussion point, right? It's fine to be critical of the coaching staff. It's fine to try and figure out what they're doing, but the consistent, he needs to play more and all of that. It's exhausting and it's not fun discussion or debate amongst, Rockets fans. It's boring. It's played out at this point. So those are my thoughts on that. Coming up, I want to talk about the Christian Wood stuff, whether or not the Rockets should keep him long-term, whether they need to look to trade him, the benefits of both, the arguments on both sides of the aisle there. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at TrueBill, because look, do you know why free trials renew without your consent? It's a business scam out to get you. Don't let greedy corporations pocket your hard-earned money. Download TrueBill to take control of your subscriptions. TrueBill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions that you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 per year with TrueBill because companies make subscriptions so hard to cancel. TrueBill makes it incredibly simple. Just link your accounts and TrueBill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap, one click, one button press. It is that easy. Don't fall for any more subscription scams. Start canceling today at TrueBill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now. That's TrueBill.com/LockedOnNBA. It could save you thousands a year. That's TrueBill.com/LockedOnNBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's get into the internal debate about Christian Wood. Now, I am still on the side of not necessarily being completely ready to ship out Christian Wood. Maybe that's because I'm just an optimist at heart and I'm so, positive and cheery and all that good stuff. Now, look, I'll start on the opposite side of the aisle and a lot of the arguments for trading Christian Wood, right? And I think one of the biggest ones is the Rockets don't, right? Most people don't want to pay Christian Wood max money, or most people don't think Christian Wood is worth max money. So, somewhere north of, right, his max extension number is it's 5 years, 200 something million, when he becomes extension eligible at the end of this current deal. So what, 40 something million a year ballpark, or, somewhere lower 30s and then gradually rises up. So I think that's one of the biggest, debates regarding Christian Wood is that he's not worth that max dollar money. And I would agree. I don't think he's necessarily worth that gigantic albatross contract either. Maybe he's worth that money if you already have your championship core in place. If Christian Wood is the final piece of a James Harden led team, then yeah, maybe you're just okay, we're just going to throw the money at him because he's the best piece and we either lose him for nothing or what have you. But right now the Rockets are in the midst of a rebuild. And so can you really justify handing out that gigantic contract to Christian Wood as the Rockets are at the early stages of their rebuild? Because again, that contract would come up, it would show up the next, year and a half. That's, not next season, but the following season. So can you realistically justify giving him that contract? Or, because can you expect the Rockets rebuild to be at a point where you're comfortable and confident with all the pieces that have been acquired, the current crop of young guys, how they're developing, whoever the Rockets pick in this upcoming draft, all that talent? And are you then comfortable to then cement Christian Wood as a piece as far as your long-term rebuild? So two counters to that I have. One, I don't necessarily think that Christian Wood is going to get that max money on the open market from another team. I think that's a big assumption, is that, Christian Wood, he's just, another team, he's an unrestricted free agent. Another team is just going to throw the bag at him and the Rockets are going to have to match or they lose him for nothing, right? I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think you could very easily argue that Christian Wood would be worth, even on the open market, somewhere in the 20 to 25 million a year range, basically like talking somewhere around like Jarrett Allen level money or like John Collins level money. And yeah, there might be a team out there that's like desperate enough to just throw the entire bag at Christian Wood. And that's a risk that you're kind of calculating, right? And I haven't looked up the cap numbers to see which teams are going to have, open amounts of space. But I also think that, Christian Wood's not necessarily like the hottest commodity to where teams are going to be actively planning to have him, to throw max cap space at him that summer, right? So, I think that that's maybe a little bit blown out of proportion as far as like a reason to want to move him now because of some fear that they're going to lose him later on. And then the other flip side of that is, even if the Rockets were to sign him to a gigantic deal, or let's say they luck out and they get him on a slightly team friendlier deal, right? Somewhere in the 20, 25, 30 million per year, maybe like something like 4 years, 4 years, 120, or 4 years, 4 years, 100, something like that. That's a very tradable contract for what Christian Wood brings to the table as a big, right? There's not a lot of bigs in the NBA that can do what Christian Wood does on a nightly basis, offensively, at least. Yeah, the defense at times leaves something to be desired, but Christian Wood has also shown spurts where he's been more locked in defensively, right? And I think that like against this Lakers team, right, there were a lot of people pointing fingers at Christian Wood. And I already aired, my points about the fact that the Rockets' entire defensive game plan was, thrown to the side when Fizdale decided to start LeBron James at center. And then not only that, you had Christian Wood and Al P like defending out of position, like all this stuff. So overall, like, I don't think you can pin all of the Rockets' defensive woes on Christian Wood. I think that overall, I think those complaints are largely overblown about Christian Wood's struggles defensively. He's shown an ability to be a decent rim protector at times. He's been decent in pick and roll coverages. He can switch. Is Christian Wood a lockdown, like defensive anchor? No, not at all. Can he realistically, become a better defender over time? I think so. Like ultimately, I don't want to say that we should consider like last year, like Christian Wood's like rookie year, but last year was Christian Wood's first year being a big like focal point of a team and having a consistent role and not having to fight and claw and scrap for a spot in a rotation somewhere, right? And he made the most of it in his 41 games last season. He put up, near all-star level numbers. He looked really, really good for stretches of the season. He made strides defensively. And then this season, things were rough to start, but he's back in the role that he flourishes at as a 5. And I think that's about putting the right pieces around him to where the team defensive scheme can succeed, where, Christian Wood's never going to be a defensive anchor like a Jarrett Allen or a DeAndre Ayton type big. That's just not who he is. But that's the trade-off for the versatility that he gives you as an offensive threat, right? He causes mismatches on that end of the floor. So it's a bit of a trade-off, right? Because otherwise, yeah, he'd be a year in, year out all-star if he was also suddenly like a lockdown defensive big in addition to all the things that he can do offensively. And then, yeah, he'd absolutely be worth max money. He'd be an Anthony Davis type, but that's just not who he is right now. He can probably get a little bit better. But I'm also kind of walking, in a couple circles here. I want to make sure I hit my other points on Christian Wood. As far as, what it would look like, moving him in a deal, all that good stuff, some of the other reasons on the other side of the aisle for potentially keeping him, some of those arguments, and I want to get there after a quick message from our friends over at betonline.ag. Because BetOnline has you covered this holiday season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues on and college bowl season is Here, BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head over to their website and use promo code LOCKEDON to receive a 50% bonus on your very first deposit. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, UFC, even your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available. BetOnline, where the game starts. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Continuing our discussion on Christian Wood and whether or not he should stay or he should go. So one of the points, right, is what type of a return would the Rockets even be looking for in a potential Christian Wood trade, right? So if you scale things back and you go all the way back and you think, okay, the Rockets picked up 2 firsts for Robert Covington. And one of those firsts turned into Christian Wood, and the other one turned into Usman Garuba. So arguably for Christian Wood, I think that you need to look at it in the sense of that was the cost to acquire Christian Wood. So what would be, an adequate return for C Wood? I would argue you're looking at, it needs to be at least a first round pick and then at least a young prospect and then like whatever the filler would be on the contract side of things, right? So some combination of 2 assets returned for Christian Wood. Something I would prefer like something liquid, like a first round draft pick, like a future first, and then a young prospect would be great. 2 future firsts might be a bit of a steep asking price, right? Because again, first round draft picks are the best asset in the NBA. They're the most liquid asset. It's the currency that makes the NBA go round. And so 2 firsts for Christian Wood might be a bit of a steep asking price depending on how desperate the opposing team is. And another consideration on this front is Miles Turner from the Indiana Pacers is currently, reportedly on the trading block as well. So any team that might be looking at Christian Wood as, a potential new starting center for their team or a big man for their team might also be inquiring about Miles Turner. So it depends on what the Pacers are looking for as far as their return, right? And if the Pacers kind of set the bar with a trade for Miles Turner, then that kind of dictates what the Rockets are going to be able to get as far as a return for Christian Wood. So if the Pacers are suddenly only able to pull a first round draft pick for Miles Turner, then there's no way in hell the Rockets are going to walk away with multiple assets for Christian Wood. At the most, they'd walk away with, a first round draft pick, something along those lines. So that's something else to consider, right? Is the market currently oversaturated on 5-out bigs, and are not even a debate. Miles Turner is a better player than Christian Wood right now. Like if I could swap the two, I would swap the two in an absolute heartbeat right now at this very moment. Miles Turner is a significantly better defender. He's not quite as polished offensively, but he's younger. He's got, the potential is there. So he is currently number 1 on the trading block for a team that needs a center this trade deadline. And then Christian Wood is, 1 peg below that. So that's another consideration to think about whether or not, the Rockets should be looking to move Christian Wood at this trade deadline, or potentially, right? Is it right to try to move him at this deadline? Is it best to revisit this conversation in the offseason? Arguably, I think that if they're looking to try and trade Christian Wood, this deadline makes the most sense. But you can also look at it next offseason and say, you know what? We can revisit this conversation, and maybe the teams that are potentially interested in Christian Wood are currently vying for Miles Turner, or they don't want to fork up enough, and you just come back next offseason and check it out. And then potentially even further down the line, you maybe take a look at the following trade deadline, right? When he's going into the final half season of his contract, and the Rockets would be able to trade Christian Wood. They would trade his bird rights. And so if a team really wants Christian Wood, and if that's a destination that he would be willing to re-sign at long-term, then you explore that trade much, much further down the line. But I think I want to get to some of the points that I have for why I don't necessarily think that the Rockets are in a position where they have to trade Christian Wood, because I think that's some of the mentality from a lot of Rockets fans right now is it feels like a lot of Rockets fans think that the Rockets have to trade Christian Wood because Alperen Sengun has looked so good. And, there's not a way for those two guys to coexist, or Alperen Sengun is the future and Christian Wood is, he's 26 years old. He's not going to be here, for the rebuild. He's already, over the hill. No. So first off, I don't understand that as like one of the debate points is Christian Wood is 26. Like what? Acting like Christian Wood being 26 is the reason to trade him is just downright silly. Let me like throw this out there as far as like timelines are concerned, right? So we're seeing currently like Ja Morant, Luka Doncic, DeAndre Ayton, Trae Young. They're all like absolutely coming into their own as NBA players and have led their respective teams to the playoffs. And, in like the case of like DeAndre Ayton and Trae Young, like deep playoff runs. Ja Morant and the Grizzlies are on the up and up. Luka is Luka, right? And he's been phenomenal. If Jalen Green like pans out to anything remotely close to what Rockets fans are hoping he pans out to, in 3 years, when Jalen Green is 22 years old, just like all of those other guys, 22, 23, ballpark, that little range, third, fourth year in the NBA, that'll be Jalen Green, in 3 to 4 years. If he pans out to his max potential, he'll be on the same, plane of existence as some of the names that I just threw out there. Christian Wood's going to be 29. Like, why is that suddenly a thing? Like, I think that, and again, I've equated it to like, it's okay that you don't have your entire core all smack dab in the same age range, right? If anything, it's actually pretty cool that the Rockets potentially have a couple guys like C. Wood, like Jae'Sean Tate, who are going to be a little bit older. And then they're going to have like the rest of like the younger guys, the draft picks that they currently have, or the young prospects that they currently have, the draft pick that they'll pick up this next season. They're going to have some varying age ranges. So that way you don't have your entire roster like all aging out at the same time. Not only that, you're also not going to have like contract extensions and negotiations and all that kicking in at the exact same time. So that kind of helps as far as like being able to decide like, okay, are we committing the money now? Are we moving on from this guy now? Like, are we going to, what kind of a deal can we strike with this guy? We can have some, really talented players on team-friendly deals while we've got like the more established players on like lockdown long-term deals, like all this kind of stuff. So I don't necessarily think Christian Wood's age should be a factor here. Like consider like trying to think that he's 26 right now and he's too old to be around for when the Rockets are potentially relevant down the line in 2, 3, or 4 years. I think it's a little silly and a little premature to paint that as one of the issues surrounding Christian Wood. But I think the biggest one and the number one issue at hand is, can Christian Wood and Alperen Sengun coexist? That's the number one thing, because Alperen Sengun has shown so many flashes, right? Is he a future franchise cornerstone? I don't know. I think that's, probably a little bit too much weight to put on the 19-year-old kid's shoulders at this point. Is he going to absolutely be a like future star in this league? I think so. Maybe not like franchise cornerstone-esque, maybe not Nikola Jokic-esque. It's still really early on to, we're not even halfway through his rookie season, but the kid is special and he's going to be really good for a really, really long time. Can he be really good alongside Christian Wood? Oh my God, that rhymed. Susical and musical up in Locked On Rockets. Anyways, but seriously, I think that's been one of the main points. And similar to the Rockets making it a point that they needed to get the data set on Kevin Porter Jr. this season as the point guard, giving him the reins to the offense, giving him the keys, all of that, and seeing whether or not he can really be the point guard of the future. I think that the back half of this Rocket season needs to be there needs to be a focus, or maybe not even like the back half of the season, right? Like leading up to the NBA trade deadline in February, right? There needs to be a focus placed on increasing the minutes between Alperen Sengun and Christian Wood. This is not me more Alp minutes would be nice. I'm still in that camp, sure. But there needs to be more overlapping minutes between those two guys to see if they can really coexist as a double big lineup on the floor, and if they can really make it work on both ends, right? Offensively and defensively. I don't really have questions about how they're going to make it work offensively. As long as Christian Wood buys into not having the ball in his hands and Alp can have the ball and create for everybody else on the floor, it's going to work out just fine. I don't really have issues about it offensively. Defensively is where the question marks really start to pop up, is because neither one of those guys have shown like a proclivity to be able to guard some of the better wings that they're matched up with when one of them is slotted in at the 4 spot. So that's a bit of concern, right? Can they get the defensive scheme down to where the Rockets aren't getting burned when those two guys are on the floor together defensively? In fact, I have their numbers pulled up right now. Also, they're only averaging like 4 minutes like together, like 3.8 minutes played together since the Rockets ditched the double big lineup. So the start of the 7-game win streak. Alperen and Christian Wood are only averaging like 3.8 minutes on the floor together over that, since November 24th, which is a little silly. But also since November 24th, because like I said earlier, I feel like we just got to ball up the like double big lineup with Wood and Tice and like those 15, 17 games and just throw that out the window. So since November 24th, Alperen Sengun and Christian Wood together on the floor have a defensive rating of 122.8. That's not great. It's not super promising, unfortunately. Their offensive rating is 103.3. And they've played 57 minutes together. So it's not a huge sample size. And that's part of the problem is, again, similar to KPJ, the Rockets need data points to be able to figure out, okay, can this duo work together? And can they, realistically be like the starting front court of the Rockets for the future? And if they can, then great. Suddenly it doesn't become a requirement to trade Christian Wood because you're no longer inhibiting the growth and the development of Alperen Sengun. And if they can coexist together, great. Christian Wood is incredibly talented, and being able to feed off of Alperen Sengun offensively is going to do wonders for him. All of that. It's whether or not they can make things work on the defensive side of the ball. And even offensively, it's looked a little sticky at times, right? So I think there's a lot of questions there. And I think that's the number one thing moving forward that I want to see from this team is, can they work together on the floor? Do you think the Rockets should trade Christian Wood, right? Like drop in the YouTube comments, right? Drop your points on Christian Wood. I threw it up on Twitter and I had a lot of people on both sides of the aisle talking about, trade Christian Wood. He's a bad defender, listing out all their different reasons. And then I had people on the other side of the aisle saying, keep Christian Wood, right? There's no reason that, the Rockets can't keep him, commit the money to him down the line, and then trade him, right? You're not bound to Christian Wood for 4 or 5 years just because you sign him to a long-term contract, right? He's shown that he picked Houston when he first was a free agent. He wanted to be here despite the drama with Russell Westbrook and James Harden. He has repeatedly come out and said that he wants to play for the city, that he rides for Houston, all these things. And Rockets fans are very quick to want to trade him. The closest thing the Rockets have had to a franchise guy in the post James Harden era. So yeah, I don't know. It's a very cantankerous relationship between Rockets fans and Christian Wood, but I'm still of the opinion that I think he should. I'm not ready to ship him out quite just yet. So maybe that's wrong. And I'm, always down to be proven wrong down the line. So with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. As always, appreciate you checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider just tail into the show. And I'm losing it. Please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Google, the brand new Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. Also check out the Locked On Rockets YouTube channel, search Locked On Rockets on YouTube, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.